Greetings, this is the Questing GM. So I'm back with another new video for my Prep Quest series on Out the Abyss. And today's this video will be about Chapter 10, into Descent into the Depths. This might be another short video for the series because Chapter 10 is generally another, what you could say, it's like the housekeeping chapter. It's pretty much has the same content or same structure with the second chapter in the first half, where they generally give you ideas about what the characters can do in the Underdark. And the main difference here will obviously be that in chapter 2, it was about generating random encounters and having a group of prisoners and just traveling around places, and there are a few choice encounters that could happen. But for chapter 10, generally it's different because now that it's assumed that the party has also sort of gathered a number of allies, mainly from the factions that they have encountered in chapter 8 in Grim. Then they have formed a relatively small force or small army that the PCs will have to lead them around through the Underdark. And therefore, I would say about half the chapter in chapter 10 is mainly just about how to maintain and how to coordinate and how to run those NPCs that the PCs have, and what are the considerations that the PCs would need to take to keep everyone in line and while they're traveling. And then there's a small section about just some additional new encounters that the PCs could face with the expeditionary force behind them. It comes also with a new downtime activity, a very minor one. The last section of the chapter is about retracing steps. Is generally what happens if the PCs do revisit all the known settlements from the first half, in the second half of the adventure, after they have escaped from the Underdark and returned to it. So the chapter itself runs from page 143 all the way to page 149. So yes, it's a very short chapter, and generally I would say this is not something that I have really that much to talk about as well, in a sense that it serves its purpose. But let's just go through some of the sections as we go along. So as I mentioned, in the first half of the chapter, it talks about mainly how to deal with how to organize the expeditionary force that is following the PCs. So they have sections on what you need to bear in mind, which is like things as marching orders, travel pace, navigating, scouting. So these are actually general rules that you can actually find in a player's handbook about overland traveling. These are all the things that has to be taken into consideration. But of course, now that the PCs is assumed to have several NPCs following them, how does that change the game? Like, how does it change the mechanic? How the players engage with the mechanics, because they can actually assign NPCs to do the work. And in terms of marching order, who's in front, who's at the rear, and who's in the middle. In terms of travel pace, that the PCs have to decide the travel pace as a group, or they can even decide different groups have different travel paces, and therefore how does that affect the travel. Navigation is also another thing, like who is in charge of the navigation and scouting. These are just basically add-ons to the rules of the already in the player's handbook. So I would definitely highly recommend that you read those rules about overland traveler, how does marching order and all this sort of work, and try to work your way in. This is also the same section where there's a sidebar that talks about how do you handle combat with a larger force, and that's where they recommend using the handling mobs rule from Dungeon Master's Guide, which is generally the same rule that you would use in chapter 2 in the first half of the adventure when they're traveling through the Underdark. And the next section is called In Command, where they give some additional considerations or restrictions that comes with commanding a large force. So they have things like personalities, they have personality clashes. They by bringing the NPCs to the Underdark, they actually risk those NPCs suffering from madness, and they tell you how to handle madness as a mob rather than as individual NPCs. Then they recommend you using the loyalty variant rules, also found in the Dungeon Master's Guide, if you want to track whether how long or how loyal the NPCs will actually want to stay with the players. So there may be certain events that causes the NPCs to be disloyal and decide to abandon the expedition, as an example. So that definitely adds a different another layer to managing a expeditionary force. And then there's the question of provisions and treasure, because with a larger force, obviously you need to feed them, and therefore the supply of food comes into question, and there's actually definitely more mouths to feed. So how the PCs will manage that provisions and food and water definitely becomes a very major factor in getting everyone in line. The same goes for treasure, in the sense that if there are random encounters or random dungeons that the PCs run into and they do find treasure, how do they divide that among the faction members, or do they even divide them among the faction members? And if they don't, maybe those NPCs would feel like they are not being treated fairly or equally, and that may affect their morale or even their loyalty to some point. So it's kind of pretty much the PC's job to maintain order, because they will be treated as the leaders of the expeditionary force, and how the PCs do that. It's a really one aspect or facet of playing in the Out the Abyss, in the second half of Out the Abyss. And then they also give you suggestions of like building a chain of command, having a chain of command between different NPCs of different factions, and how do they report to the PCs, and maybe the PCs themselves will want to delegate among themselves who is responsible for which parts of the organization of the expeditionary force. Then the next section comes up on page 145, which is about random events. So random events is generally the new random encounters that is tagged on with the random encounters that comes in chapter 2. Although I don't see any reason why the random events that are provided here cannot be used in the first half of the adventure. They can pretty much, in fact, actually I would think it actually makes a bit more sense for it to be in the first half, because they have things like besides your usual encounters, your usual like combat oriented encounters or creature encounters, that where they meet up with a demon or they meet up with other monsters. But I think the one that's more interesting is actually the NPC event encounters, things like discipline problems, where different NPCs fight among each other, for especially if they come from rather opposing factions. For example, like the Zentarium with maybe someone from the Order of the Gauntlet or Lord's Alliance, who are opposed to each other. You could say sometimes the Harpers could get into a bit of a idealistic tuffle with maybe someone from the Order of the Gauntlet, and the Emerald Enclave may also have some opposing ideas with the Lord's Alliance because of the whole conflict between civilization and the wilderness, which both sides represent. As a result of that, they can lead to either noise that can attract random encounters, or it's just NPCs fighting out among each other, and then the PCs have to step in and see how they handle the situation. Other NPC events can be disease, just simply one of the NPCs contracting a disease from somewhere. They could also could also be a victim of madness. So what is recommended in this chapter, at least it says that you don't have to roll for the wisdom saving throws, but if you roll the random encounter and you got a madness result, then one of the NPCs will get a madness, and it's really up to PCs to decide how they want to deal with that. Then there's also poison. It could have came from some sort of tainted food source or water source, and they suffer the poison condition. And then you have spoiled supplies, where in the sense that any supply that the PCs were carrying, or they found, or they foraged, or they've gathered, or they bought, came out spoiled, and therefore it's unusable, and therefore that leads to another challenge in not having enough food for the expeditionary force, and the resulting fallout that can come from that. And then lastly, there's just simply outright vanishing. Some NPCs may they just disappear out into nowhere, and whether you allow the PCs to trace back that NPC to find that NPC, or maybe that NPC has just left the group, like just abandoned and absconded from the group for whatever reasons. Then coming on to the next section, they provide a new downtime activity which is called establishing outposts. So the assumption here is basically, as the PCs are traveling through the Underdark, it's not practical for them to always double back to say Grim or to the nearest settlement to try to get supplies, because it will just extend the time of their traveling. So what the book is providing you is that you can actually spend about 150 hours of work to build an outpost, and that's where you can store your provisions, and it may be closer to get to the nearest outpost to replenish your supplies rather than going back to a settlement and do that sort of thing. Although the only problem here is that the activity itself is provided, but it doesn't really give much suggestions in the way of how do you manage the outpost. Presumably, you to leave some of the NPCs behind to sort of guard the outpost, or maybe someone in charge of the outpost. Can the outpost be destroyed? Can the outpost be attacked? It's also not really. There's also not really clearly stated. And how much can you store, or what are the sort of conditions that you need to build an outpost? That's that sort of thing. So it's a good starting point, but it definitely needs some more work, some more thought put into it to how do you want to run this in your campaign. And I think one rather major obstacle or challenge is that it takes 150 hours of work to do. Now you could try to reason this that you can actually, the PCs can actually delegate the NPCs to actually build the outpost, and they have to just work the normal 8 hours a day times how many NPCs to finish up the 150 hours, 150 hours to build the outpost. Uh, but that just brings in another element that the PCs will have to, the PCs not only have to spend time traveling, but they may have to spend time laying low somewhere and build an outpost out of it. So the last section, which I think is the most interesting section, is basically what happens when the PCs retrace their steps, and the chapter basically just gives a whole dedicates a special section for each of the major settlements that's been mentioned in the book so far. So we'll start off with Blingdenstone. So they'll tell you what happens if you go back to Blingdenstone, whether the PCs has put down the Pudding King or not. So I think one interesting thing about the retracing step section is that basically this can be sort of like as a development of the settlement, whether the PCs have been there before or not. And the book definitely does, give suggestions of what happens if certain events didn't take place within that particular settlement when the PCs come back or return, or have it or been there are going there for the first time. So for the case of Blingdenstone, is in the sense that the Pudding King plot is basically still there if the PCs haven't really resolved it. But if the PCs already have been dealt with, they would find out that actually if the Pudding King is already dead, then the oozes actually start to leave Blingdenstone, and they're actually heading towards Dreeblax, which is going to be covered in a much later chapter. As Dreeblax is trying to find his way to fight against Zookmoy. Blingdenstone is the only settlement that explicitly states that they can actually get more allies to follow the expeditionary force, and it says here that you can actually get, if you manage to convince Chief Durbo Digamator, who is the de facto leader of the deep gnomes in Blingdenstone, you can actually get about 12 more deep gnomes to follow the expeditionary force. So that's definitely one consideration that you can think about, whether you will allow the PCs to actually get more followers if they actually do make it to Blingdenstone. The next location is the Dark Lake. So Dark Lake is basically, if the PCs are probably going to have to visit it at some point in the book. The book pretty much assumes that the PCs have visited in the first half. So when they go back, they're basically only going to see that Slupitu has been utterly destroyed. There are few remnant survivors. They are still squabbling among their different factions. And if Shusha isn't dead, who is the Quota prisoner from all the way to chapter 1, if Shusha isn't dead, then he would probably be the mediator between the squabbling factions. But for all intents and purposes, Slupitu is pretty much not usable as a safe haven as it once was. Basically, returning there is just to see the damage that's been done by Demogorgon, and maybe even the cultish influence of Demogorgon is just growing there. Now, I think the most interesting place to revisit would actually be Greco-Stark, because Greco-Stark, they give sort of two alternative plot lines that could happen if the PCs revisit it or go there for the first time. If they actually if you decided to let them bypass the Duergar city as a whole. So the first idea is basically the tensions between the keepers of the flame and the Grey Ghosts. There's just the fighting continues, and the second one is basically that the keepers of the flame are about to execute their plot, which is to kill Tempershout, their wormsmith, and actually replace him with a new red dragon egg. There is also this subplot where the sense that because back in the Greco-Stark chapter, the Duergar and the Darrow are actually plotting to sort of change, like make the red dragon egg they have influenced by Demogorgon, and then once that red dragon replaces Temple Shout, then he's we're gonna get a Demogorgon, a demonic dragon, red dragon, and then and he will rule over Gracklestock and place the Darrow place the Darrow up into power. So that's I think that's a good development into the Gracklestock plot. Like if the PCs do revisit, you can actually escalate the tensions between the Grey Ghosts, the Keepers of the Flame, and obviously the Duergar guards into pretty much a more tenuous situation, and maybe actually bring the PCs to face up with Temple Shout. Actually have to fight with Temple Shout as a red dragon, and that could actually for, there's still a lot of room or development that can happen uh, after the PCs have left Gracklestock the first time and coming back to it again. Uh, Now the next location I will keep it for the last, because this is one's a little bit odd. So I'll move on to the next one, which is Neverlight Grove. So Neverlight Grove basically the influence of Zookmoy has just spread all over the place. It's basically she has effectively almost taken control of Neverlight Grove. So if the PCs do return there after having escaped from Zookmoy the first time, then the Sovereign Philo actually sort of intercepts the PCs and tell them to just don't go back to Neverlight Grove, tell them to leave, and she actually sort of drops a plot hook, plot thread to the PCs that Sovereign Philo, the one who was not influenced by Zookmoy spores, that Philo will actually come and look for the PCs again for a later part of the adventure, which is covered in the chapter where Zookmoy wants to get married with another fungal being. Yeah. So that's basically what happens if the PCs actually try to go to Neverlight Grove. They will actually get chased out. But if the PCs insist on going in anyway and maybe want to deal with Zookmoy, then by all means. But things are probably not going to end very well at that point. And the last place that the PCs can go is actually Valkenvale, for whatever reason that the PCs decide to just drop by the place where they were formerly captured. The and since assuming they have dealt with Ilvara, the priestess who used to run Valkenvale, and if she's already dead, then they will basically find Valkenvale is under new management with a new bunch of drows, and it becomes a drow outpost. The PCs can just go in and clear it as they want if they want to. They do provide with a few slaves that have been captured in Valkenvale, so those slaves can also join the expeditionary force if you so allow them to. But other than that, that's pretty much the only thing that the book gives you out of Valkenvale. Now the last location that I saved for last was actually Menzum Baranzan. And actually Menzum Baranzan isn't involved in the first half of the adventure, so there's really unless the PCs somehow didn't manage to escape Valkenvale and actually got sent to Menzum Baranzan. But the Menzum Baranzan chapter comes much later. It's almost nearing the end of the adventure itself. So it's a real detraction from the intended plot line, you could say, of the book. But if there's any reason that the pieces ended up in Menzum Baranzan and escaped, and now they want to come back to Menzum Baranzan again for whatever reason, at this point in the book, there is really no reason at all for the PCs to want to go to Menzum Baranzan yet. But in any case, if for whatever reason the PCs do want to go to Menzum Baranzan with the expeditionary force that comes along with them, then there is this entire section that talks about as their forces are approaching towards Menzum Baranzan, they actually get stopped by one of the Lord's Alliance spies, who is a elf disguised as a drow, and she sort of warns the PCs at expeditionary force that if they proceed further, the drow will respond with a significant force of their own, and they actually provide the composition of that force. They would actually come to actual blows. It would actually be an actual battle between two numerous forces somewhere in the Underdark, and that's probably the major event that happens when the PCs want to go to Menzoberranzan, and if they do manage to defeat that force that goes against them, then I, the book then just goes silent about what happens if the PCs do make it to Menzoberranzan with the expeditionary force, which I can assume you will only have the Menzoberranzan chapter to really go by, but things have pretty much derailed from the main plot as it is. So I guess at that point you're pretty much on your own to really figure things out. Okay, so that's a general summary of chapter 10. Like I said, it's not there's not really a lot there's not really a lot of materials to go with in terms of there's the additional random encounters, but if you've already included that in chapter 2, you're pretty much doing the same thing. I guess the only real spice that you could add to the chapter is the monsters that they face. Obviously, try to go for something of a higher CR that's closer to the party level. Maybe you could use certain monsters that are tied to the demon lords. Like in the chapter itself, they give you suggestions like you're dealing with black puddings, you're dealing with gnolls and hyenas. Maybe drop in a minotaur or two, for each of these monsters are actually sort of tied to one of the demon lords. Then there's also a higher likelihood of demon encounters, so you can fight with higher CR demons as well, and just to give them a taste of what is it like to fight with demons. But for now, I think the real gist or the real purpose, at least what the book recommends for doing all these traveling bits in the second half, is that the book actually does provide you with some guidelines about what's sort of expected by the book. If you read right at the beginning of the chapter, page 143, it will tell you that when the PCs travel from Mental Darif back to Graven Hollow, which is practically back, almost nearly back to Gondogrim, after they've got the ring from the Zentarium agent there to find the Graven Hollow Stone Library. It tells you that you're actually supposed to make sure that by the time the PCs reach Graven Hollow from Mental Darif, they will be at level 10. And then from there, once the PCs, whatever happens within Graven Hollow and the subsequent chapters that follows it, once they are ready to go to fight against Zookmoy and Jublex, effectively also Jublex, in a later chapter, they should be level 14 by chapter 16, and then by the time they are ready to finish the adventure itself with the final chapter, they should be level 15. So that guideline that is provided in this chapter here. So that sort of gives you the estimation of where you want to take the PCs to, what sort of encounters you want to throw at them to make sure they get up to the right level. But that's all really subjective, because in the sense that it really depends on how you want to manage, or how do you do XP in your running of the base. Do you want to do milestone, or do you do XP counting? Because if you do XP counting, then you're going to have to prepare the encounters ahead of time, and having the expeditionary force tagging along with the PC also definitely adds a bit more complication to the math. Or do you need to add more encounters or larger encounters so that every NPCs get the same amount of XP and all that, because that's technically what's supposed to happen by raw. So these are all general concepts, general ideas that the book is sort of moving towards, but it can change drastically depending on how you run it. For like in my case, I didn't let the PCs, and neither did the PCs want to have an expeditionary force that's following behind them. So as I said, pretty much half of the chapter talking about how to manage the expeditionary force didn't apply to my running of Out the Abyss. I practically supplanted whatever random encounters that was here into chapter 2 already. And even then, giving some random NPC random madness didn't feel right for the PCs at times, because they felt like it wasn't really like done fairly in some senses. And we definitely didn't revisit the places they have been included, and and including Menzel Branson, because they have already visited them already in the first half. So chapter 10 is really a, it's just a scattering of ideas, and it's not something that can really give real insight, because I didn't really use it according to what it says, or at least not in the way the book intended to. But in any case, I hope, by me summarizing this chapter, it can, you know point you to different directions. I'm not necessarily trying to lead you to them, but just telling you what's available in the book so that you can make up your own decisions of how you want to do chapter 10. I guess if you already know what you're going to do in chapter 2 of Out the Abyss, and how you're going to run the Underdark traveling, there's really not much, there's really nothing really new for you in chapter 10. So if you're thinking of, it's just worth perusing through, like just to see what's available in it. But I don't see any real reason why you need to keep any of the major plot points or plot threads that were suggested in chapter 10 to be used in the adventure. I don't think any of them really changes anything. The real game changer is going to happen in chapter 11, once the PCs actually enter into Graven Hollow. And I'll talk about what's the little bit. There's some minor differences that I did with Graven Hollow, but nothing drastic. And as I probably mentioned it at some point in the Mental Dare chapter video as well. So I guess that's really much about it. That's chapter 10 of Out the Abyss, Descent into the Depths. So like I said, it's a useful chapter rather than a must chapter. So, I guess I can just put it simply that way. Just see what you want from it and use what you want from it, and if not, you can just discard everything else depending on how you decide to run it. So I guess that'll be all for this video of Prep Quest for Out the Abyss. So hopefully I'll see you very soon. In the next Prep Quest video, I'll definitely be talking about chapter 11, where the PCs actually arrive at Graven Hollow. So this is the Questing GM signing off for now, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.